a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could.
What happens when a blind man, a woman of color, and a child of immigrants get together to discuss how diversity, inclusion, and equity affect your business?
I'm moving fast. Oh, I'm optimistic.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Choose Inclusion podcast. I'm UB and I am the Latino white guy of the group.
I'm Nina. I am the woman of color in the group.
And I'm Mike. I'm the blind guy.
Yeah, Nina, go.
All right. So, Tina, what I want to know more about, let me give you some context from my perspective. I was living in New York City when 9/11 happened, and I was 21 years old, and I think that's around the time where I started really paying attention to the news. I've been around those kind of college years is when I started actually paying attention to the world outside of my own little bubble.
Same here.
And then, on September 12th, 2001, I became highly aware of how biased the media was. Because as a brown woman living in New York City, I had a very different perspective, and I did not see my perspective being touted in any of the media that I was watching. So that was my awakening and opening to the fact that I had to go find other sources of news to see the viewpoints that I felt weren't being covered, right? Like what was actually happening on the ground outside of country, what was happening to Muslim, Hindu, Bangladeshi, brown people in the US was not being covered. And so it was around that time that I started finding different outlets of news. I stopped reading, going to just the New York Times and the Washington Post to get all my information, but I discovered there's a blog called Sepia Mutiny back then that was all voices and writers from the South Asian diaspora writing about those experiences and reporting on it. And I started finding media that was largely by Black founders and them writing about their stories. How do we reconcile that? It's in some ideal world, we would have a place where every single journalist is seen, valued, and heard and all together, but at the same time creating these spaces for these voices to be heard. How do we kind of mesh those two, or should we even?
Well, one of the articles in our book is by a woman from Latin America, and she compares, she's writing from Costa Rica, and she's comparing the media to the environment and saying that the threat to the environment is the same as a threat to media. And in both cases, what she's talking about is a lack of diversity in the ecosystem. So what you were just talking about, you could find Black founded media outlets. You could find blogs about the South Asian diaspora. You could also find maybe columnists that you like in some of the mainstream outlets. You could find TV shows, you could find radio shows, you could find podcasts, hopefully. If you have a rich media ecosystem like that, where there's a lot of cross-pollination between them, right? Where a writer who used to write for a feminist magazine like Bitch might also get a chance to write for the New York Times op-ed page one day, right? Where there's cross-pollination, there's a rich amount of different sources and different diverse places that you can go through. Then you have a good system where you can compare and contrast what kind of information you're getting, right? So you might look at, okay, what did the New York Times say? And then be like, okay, well, that's not the view that my podcast that I listen to has, or that my, my favorite blog has, or something like that. The problem is that, first of all, when there's economic hardship in the media community, a lot of these little publications get eaten up or go out of business. And as people increasingly don't wish to pay for journalism, that also becomes a problem where the people who suffer from that the most are the smaller outlets. And that's where those spaces that you're talking about become really threatened, because places like the New York Times and the Washington Post will always have a chance. They'll always find funding. But the smaller outlets maybe not. So I would say that it's, first of all, if you're a consumer of those kind of things, it's really important to try your best to put your money where your mouth is and support them. The big ones don't need your money as much as the small ones do.
Yeah.
And that also is the same for newspapers in other countries that you like. I subscribe to The Scroll in India, for example, that has, I think, really good news from there that helps you catch up on what's going on there, and really cheap membership. And, you just can help a little bit. But yeah, so first of all, to put your money where your mouth is, to tell other people about the media sites that you like that they might not have heard of, because it's really cool that you were able to find all those things that spoke to your experience, but there's plenty of people who aren't as savvy media consumers and don't know where to find the stuff that would really speak to them and speak to different voices. So to also speak up and promote stuff when you like it, use what platforms you do have. And on Twitter, for example, to say like, oh my God, have you guys heard this podcast? I love it. Or, I'm listening to Good Muslim, Bad Muslim for the first time. It's so incredible. Check it out. To really show those places off, because places like the New York Times, Washington Post, all the mainstream medias, they get millions of retweets a day all over the world, but the smaller ones don't. And that's also true for female voices who are much less often tweeted or quoted in the media than male voices are.
Absolutely. Mike, you
I'm
have something to jump in with.
well, I'm just so tickled with this conversation still. But the parallel that I'm hearing and what we talk about so often in every one of our episodes, like Ubaldo talked about earlier, Tina, like giving, examples. What can we do that's practical that our audience can take away? And you're really given a what we're talking about from a leadership perspective with inside of organizations. Like we still know the statistics. How many Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies are led by a white male who's 6'3" or taller, right? Like, because there's, that's what we think of leadership. But, so the numbers are still there. How many females are in leadership roles in the Fortune 1000 space on board of directors, right? Let alone minorities. And we won't even talk about persons with disabilities. We won't even go there because it's non-existent. So but that representation, just like in journalism, when you're talking about an ecosystem, like it's super important because the people with disabilities community globally is 800 million strong, and 800 million. And how many times, whether it's in journalism or in business, are we even talking about or representing that community, whether it's journalism or in business?
Yeah, absolutely. And those two things connect, right? Because if you don't see representation of people with disabilities in the media, whether that be in entertainment or in journalism, then you wouldn't think that much about them in leadership roles in companies, right? I mean, these two things build on each other.
100%.
So,
I stopped asking organizations, Tina, a long time ago. So how many blind people do you have working for your organization? Because I'll either get the cursory, like, oh, we have one. And I'm like, when you're a company of 40,000 people, like, that's not worth talking about. Like, that's like saying, hey, we have a woman that works for us. Like, how would change the narrative on that discussion if you just say we have a token, right? Like, that's not representation.
Exactly. And I think that part of the mindset shift that needs to happen is, rather than people viewing themselves as doing favors to people of color, to people with disabilities, to women by letting them into the halls of power, to recognize that they're hurting themselves by not doing that, and that they're doing a less good job than they would do otherwise. If they don't represent the communities around them, if they don't represent the world, and that's true for journalism more than anywhere else, because your public is not just white men, right? Who graduated from journalism school. Your public is the whole public. So if there's whole swaths of the public that you don't speak to, who don't see themselves represented in their newspapers, who don't see their perspectives or their stories being told, then you lose them. And you lose then readers, you lose audience, you lose subscriptions. But the same is true for this, this missing piece, this lack, is that you, by excluding people, hurt your own business, because those people can enhance it, And so this, our author from Brazil, Charles Nice, who also wrote, by the way, in Portuguese, a lot of the authors from this book wrote in different languages, and we had them translated into English and German so that we wouldn't also miss out on people who have really good points to make, but maybe don't speak English or German. So that was also something we did to address our own bias, to make sure that we allowed different languages in, because language bias is also a huge, big problem in global media. At any rate, he's talking about how in Brazil, there is actually a legal mandate to employ people with disabilities. They have they address that in their constitution, I think even. And yet when people with disabilities are employed, they're often employed in really low levels, where they don't have a large chance to influence things. So he talked about, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Tina, does that remind you of, like, we don't even have to go back that far in American history, call it 40 years ago, where what were the 2 or 3 jobs that women generally held within the employment spectrum, right? They were teachers,
right.
Maybe they were secretaries, right? Like, so again, this is the same relevant conversation about people with disabilities. It's just 2020. Like, what decade, what century are we going to start overcoming this? We're recognizing that 1 in 5 Americans are people with disabilities that are very much part of the economy.
Exactly. And I think maybe that's part of it, is having, like, coming out a little bit more, that people are aware that the people that do different jobs and write things and stuff like that have different disabilities, when that's the case. But the other thing is really making accommodations to make it possible for these people to work, and realizing that you're not doing that out of political correctness, but you're doing it because they bring a unique perspective and can really enhance your workforce. So he mentions that he talks to a journalist who's blind, who says that because he thinks that he's a better interviewer because he's blind, and that he does a lot of his work on the phone, doing interviews with people, which is not that different than what a lot of journalists do. And that, of course, when you're on the phone with people, no one can see you and tell the difference anyways, but that he thinks he has a better ability to concentrate and really listen in. He's not distracted by his computer or things like that, and believes that he is better able to really listen in on an interview. And as I has said before, as I think I mentioned before, talked about a guy who is in a wheelchair, who has mobility restrictions, who reports on in Sao Paulo in Brazil about the city, about urban development, about public transportation. And because of the just kind of, eye line that he has, he is able to tell a different story about the city than other people do. There's this theory that cities should be made for people who are 8 and 80, that a city that is well functioning is one where an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old would both feel comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And someone who
we love that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So someone who's in a wheelchair is going to be able to really tell what it's like to be in public transportation for people who would have all kinds of limited mobility, and is going to be able to tell a different story on that subject than other people would. And so seeing these things which can be perceived as disadvantages also as advantages that give you a unique outlet that also enables you to connect with your readers in a different way. You tell a different kind of story because of who you are, and those things that make you also different also make you special. And that's what people are also looking for in journalism, is to connect with people with unique perspectives.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm looking for. I think that's what most people, they don't want to just read the same thing over and over again in different language. And I think that's what turned a lot of people off about the media, is they feel it's the same voices being reproduced over and over and over again in the same fault lines and the same sort of polarizing perspectives. And often when you recognize that there's not 2 perspectives, but many, many more perspectives than that, you get much more interesting stories that also sometimes aren't so divisive, right?
Yeah.
And polarization is also contributed to by the fact that polarizing means 2 sides, right? If you recognize that there's many more sides to a story, that also decreases the polarization. It doesn't give you the easy dividing lines to fight on if you go, well, hold on, I'm coming at it from a totally different angle than either of those 2 sides are.
Man, those are, there's so many amazing things that you just said in there. And we absolutely align. What you talked about, the 8 and 80 rule, I'll call it, we talk about accessibility and the fact that everyone at one point or another has a disability, whether it's permanent or whether it's temporary. And right. we really urge organizations to understand that and to build their environment to support, even if you're just building it to support a small handful of people with permanent physical disabilities, you're actually building an environment that becomes really truly inclusive of everybody. And I think a lot of leaders who, when Mike's talking to them and Mike says, well, it's really easy. There's technology here. So a blind and visually impaired person can work here. but that leader only sees one person in a sea of 1,000 employees. When if they think about it, that just that small effort can do so much for everybody at one point in their career working in that organization. So man, I love that viewpoint. You know, we always talk about, and we can maybe close on this, but and we could probably schedule another time to keep talking because we could go on forever. But we talk about, you know, we've been really focused on empathy during COVID-19 and really helping, you know, leaders especially.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost Yubi's audio.
Yeah, sorry. I was so interested to hear what he had to say too.
No, seriously, he starts off with COVID leaders, and then we don't get to hear the punchline at all.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Oh,
Yeah.
there he is. Yeah.
You might want to start over from
yeah.
the beginning of COVID and business leaders.
Man, sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
is there an echo?
That was his usual beer time for the podcast. Sorry, Tina. So,
Right. Shh, there. Brought to you by Coors Light. But what I was saying was, so we have been focused on helping leaders understand that even though empathy is finite, there is a maturity model that where people can actually upskill, if you will, or build their empathy from just what you were kind of referencing earlier, Tina, which was people sort of overlaying their own experience over someone else's experience. So I may recognize that, you know, an emotion or, you know, that somebody's experiencing this thing. But at the lowest level of empathy, what our mirror neurons give us the ability to do is recognize that. But then I'm laying over my experience. So even though I might say, oh, I know exactly how you feel, well, not really. I know how you feel because of how I felt in that same situation. So then if you move up a level to affective empathy, it's being able to react, right? So like take a baby that's crying, for example. We can see that baby and understand that baby might be hungry. So then we react. So we're at least now taking a step of action, but it's a reaction. And then the final step where we want people to get to is compassionate empathy. Being able to recognize that there is pain in someone else, or that someone else is going through something, but not layering in my own experience, remaining logical, and then proactively coming up with solutions to help that person. And I think that just applies amazingly here because it is a mindset shift. And it's a mindset shift that not only people in leadership, people in government have to embrace, but it's also a mindset that we individually have to embrace to then go out and be able to seek all of those different perspectives or want to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that the way that everyone could take a little bit home from the journalism toolbox that we're trying to get people to use is to recognize that, it's not about political correctness. It's not about making the other person feel good, but that if you've been carrying around really inaccurate views about something, that the product that you're going to put out is going to be inaccurate too. So if someone is coming to you and saying, yeah, that's really wrong, that's biased, or do you understand that what you're saying right now is kind of racist, or that this reproduces stereotypes, that rather than immediately reacting, thinking of this person as, you know, calling you out or a troublemaker, that trying to understand where they're coming from is going to make whatever the thing that you're doing ultimately better, you know, that you don't want to have a biased output, that you don't want your story to be racist, that, you know, rather than going like, oh my God, they called me racist, now I have to react to this by explaining that I have Black friends or whatever, that you try to understand where they're coming from first, because you're looking for accuracy. That having an article or a story or whatever, or a report that's racist, it's not only just wrong because racism is bad, it's also wrong because it's inaccurate, right? Racism is inaccurate. It's not real. It's not true. It produces distortions in the truth, right? So, and that prevents us from getting to solutions. It prevents us from seeing reality, and that's what we're trying to avoid more than the personal hurt or upset about being, you know, called out. But I wanted to say also with coronavirus that I think there's kind of two other really interesting things going on in journalism, but more generally. one, that people are working from home, a lot of times working with their kids, and that a lot of offices have made this possible, and people are going, oh, okay, so I was told that my disability couldn't be accommodated, I couldn't work from home, or I was told that it would be impossible for me to take 2 days off a week so I could spend time with my infant. But now it's all possible, and it's possible for everybody.
Yup.
So
Yeah,
apparently, and some people are
say it.
finding that they prefer it, right? I mean, some workplaces are going like, why would we go back to the office?
Right.
Amen.
And the second thing that's happening from the journalism perspective is that just that thing that I was talking about before, how someone from the United States who wants to cover, the coup attempt in Venezuela, they jump on the airplane, they fly to Venezuela to cover the story. Well, you can't jump on an airplane and fly to Venezuela right now. So you're going to have to work with local journalists, right, that are already there. And that's the same for all over the world. So we're seeing what's happening is that people are forced to do kind of what we've been asking journalists to do all the time, is collaborate with people that are from those countries to tell their own stories. You're going to get more interesting stories. You're going to get more nuance, and you're going to get perspectives that you weren't aware of. And because of that, you're going to have more accuracy. And now, because of coronavirus, it's not even an option to do it the other way. So people are really already doing it. So we're hoping that people are going to learn, like, I can trust people from other countries to tell their own stories. I can trust journalists who have the same background as the story I'm reporting on to actually be trusted to tell their own narratives.
So you're saying that the pandemic is almost like leveling the playing field? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think very modestly and perhaps very narrowly, because of course a lot of journalists are also losing their jobs and their commissions right now, right? So there's that negative side of it as well. But I hope that what people will take out of this, and we have been pushing for years, like you should work with this guy in Nigeria, you should work with this person, and they go, well, how can I trust someone? I always go, how can you trust someone from Germany, right? They send in a pitch. You see if you like their work or not. It's not like Germans are inherently more trustworthy than Nigerians, right? There's no distinction. You still have to base it on what their work product is. But now I think people are more willing to take that leap. And once you've done it and you realize, like, oh, I can work with someone from Brazil or United States or Haiti without having met them or having them be endorsed by somebody else that I know, and the work product is good, that may create indeed more opportunities for up and coming journalists from all over the world. And I really hope so.
Yeah, this has been incredible. Tina, thank you so much for talking to us. And I think, we will need to probably talk more again at some point and catch up. But I think, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for the world to sort of change direction in the right way. We talk about it with organizations all the time. It really is a once in a lifetime opportunity to reboot, or even, start these initiatives that give everyone a voice, and that give everyone, as Mike always talks about, give everyone a chance to participate in our modern world.
Absolutely.
And, journalism is such an amazing window into that. And it applies, I think, across everything we're dealing with now, just as individuals, as people who are working. It's just, there's so many stories to be told and so many different perspectives, like you said.
Yeah, and I didn't even get that much into a lot of the examples from the book, and I have dozens. I'd love to talk to you guys again. It was also very interesting for me to hear what you guys are working on. And I would also really recommend, if you haven't done so, there's an article by Arundhati Roy about, the article is called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And she makes this kind of metaphor that we're in this sort of liminal space right now. We're going to walk out on the other end, out of the portal of the coronavirus. And the question is, what do we want to leave behind? And what do we want to take with us to the other side?
Mm.
Oh,
I love it.
Yeah. And this is what I've been thinking about a lot during this process. What can we take to the other? Sorry, go ahead.
No, can we get that article? Can you send that over to us, please, Tina?
I'll email that to you afterwards, definitely.
I
Thank
think,
you so much.
Yeah, we'll send it out to everybody as well. Yeah, Tina, let's definitely come back together again soon. We can talk more about the book specifically, and maybe I love this idea of how we can help people. Like, what are solutions? The solution journalism idea is just fascinating to me. Like, how we can help people, even put together a small toolkit to get started in your organization and use kind of what you all have learned through journalism to help people do that. So we'll
absolutely. Yeah. I'll send you a link
back.
to the Solutions Journalism Network as well. Because I think that that's also something for businesses quite interesting to think about. Where can I investigate what other people are doing well in order to compare and apply that to my own work without judging them because of the fact that they're different or deal with a slightly different situation. I think that's really useful.
Well, thank you all for listening. Thank you, Tina, again. It was a pleasure. I hope you and your family are doing well in Germany. And again, we look forward to the next time. So thank you, everybody, for listening in.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, UB. Thanks, Nina.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Choose Inclusion podcast. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can see closed captioning for this podcast on our YouTube channel. You can find us online on our website, chooseinclusion.com, and contact us on Twitter @chooseinclusion.